10. Roland's father was only just back from the uplands, and he looked out of place amid the drapes and the chiffoned fripperies of the main receiving hall, to which the boy had only lately been granted access as a sign of his apprenticeship. Stephen Deschain was dressed in black jeans and blue work shirt. His cloak, dusty and streaked, torn to the lining in one place, was slung carelessly over his shoulder with no regard for the way it and he clashed with the elegance of the room. He was desperately thin, and the heavily handlebar moustache below his nose seemed to weigh his head as he looked down at his son. The guns, crisscrossed over the wings of his hips, hung at the perfect angle for his hands, the worn sandalwood grips looking dull and sleepy in his languid indoor light. "The head cook," his father said softly. "Imagine it. The tracks that were blown up upland, at the railhead, the dead stock in Hendrickson, and perhaps even... Imagine. He looked more closely at his son. "It preys on you." "Like the hawk," Roland said. "It preys on you." He laughed at the startling appropriateness of the situation rather than any lightness in it. His father smiled. "Yes," Roland said. "I guess it does prey on me." "Cuthbert was with you," his father said. "He would have told his father by now." "Yes." "He fed both of you in court." "Yes." "And Cuthbert, does it prey on him, do you think?" "I don't know." Nor did he care. He was not concerned with how his feelings compared with those of others. "It preys on you because you feel you've caused a man's death." Roland shrugged unwillingly, all at once not content with this probing of his motivation. "Yet you told. Why?" The boy's eyes widened. "How could I not? Treason was—" His father waved a hand curtly. "If you did it for something as cheap as a schoolbook idea, you did it unworthily. I would rather see all of Taunton poisoned." "I didn't!" The word jerked out of him violently. "I wanted to kill him, both of them. Liars, black liars, snakes, they—" "Go ahead." "They hurt me," he finished, defiant. "They changed something, and it hurt. I wanted to kill them for it. I wanted to kill them right then and there." His father nodded. "That's rude, Roland, but not unworthy. Not moral either, but it's not your place to be moral. In fact," he peered at his son, "morals may always be beyond you. You are not quick, like Cuthbert or the Venet boy. That's all right, though. It'll make you formidable." The boy felt pleased and troubled by this. He'll hang." The boy nodded. "I want to see it." The elder Deschain threw his head back and roared in laughter. "Not as formidable as I thought. Or perhaps just stupid." He closed his mouth abruptly. His arm shot out and grabbed the boy's upper arm painfully. Roland grimaced but didn't flinch. His father peered at him steadily, and the boy looked back, although it was more difficult than holding the hawk had been. "All right," he said. "Thee may," and turned abruptly to go. "Father?" "What?" "Do you know who they were talking about? Do you know who the good man is?" His father turned back and looked at him speculatively. "Yes, I think I do." "If you caught him," Roland said in his thoughtful, near plodding way, "no one else like Cook would have been neck-popped." His father smiled thinly. "Perhaps not for a while, but in the end someone always has to have his or her neck popped. As you so quaintly put it. The people demand it. Sooner or later, if there isn't a turncoat, the people make one." "Yes," Roland said, grasping at the concept instantly. It was one he never forgot. "But if you got the good man—" "No," his father said flatly. "Why not? Why wouldn't that end it?" For a moment his father seemed on the verge of saying why, but then He just shook his head. "We've talked enough for now, I think. Go out from me." He wanted to tell his father not to forget his promise when the time came for Hax to step through the trap, but he was sensitive to his father's moods. He put his fist to his forehead, crossed one foot in front of the other, and bowed. Then he went out, closing the door quickly. He suspected that what his father wanted now was to fuck. He was aware of his mother and his father did that, and he was reasonably well informed as to how it was done, but his mental picture that always condensed with the thought made him feel both uneasy and oddly guilty. Some years later, Susan would tell him the story of Oedipus. He would absorb it in quiet thoughtfulness, thinking of the odd and bloody triangle formed by his father, his mother, and by Martin, known in some quarters as Farson, the good man. Or perhaps it was quadrangled, if one wished to add himself. 11. Gallows Hill was on the Taunton Road, which was nicely poetic. Cuthbert might have appreciated this, but Roland did not. He did appreciate the splendidly ominous scaffold which climbed into the brilliantly blue sky, an angular silhouette which overhung the coach road. The two boys had been let out of the morning exercises. Court had read the notes from their fathers laboriously, lips moving, nodding here and there. When he finished with them, he had carefully put the papers away in his pocket. Even here, in Gilead, paper was easily as valuable as gold. When these two sheets of it were safe, he looked up at the blue-violet dawn sky and nodded again. "Wait here," he said, and went towards the leaning stone hut that served him as his living quarters. He came back with a slice of rough, unrevealed bread, broke it in two, and gave half to each. "When it's over, each of you will put this beneath his shoes. Mind you, do exactly as I say, or I'll cut you into next week." They had not understood until they arrived, riding double on Cuthbert's gelding. They were at first fully 2 hours ahead of anyone else, and 4 hours before the hanging, so Gallows Hill stood deserted, except for the rocks and ravens. The birds were everywhere. They roosted noisily on the hard, jutting bar that overhung the trap, the amateur of death. They sat in a row along the edge of the platform. They jostled from position onto the stairs. "They leave the bodies," Cuthbert muttered. "For the birds." "Let's go up," Roland said. Cuthbert looked at him with something like horror. "Up there? Do you think—" Roland cut him off with a gesture of his hands. "We're years early. No one will come." "All right." They walked slowly towards the gibbet, and the birds took wing, cawing and circling like a mob of angry disposed peasants. Their bodies were flat black against the pure dawning light of the in-world sky. For the first time, Roland felt the enormity of his responsibility in the matter. This wood was not noble, not part of the awesome machine of civilization, but merely warped pine from the forest of Barony, covered with the splattered white bird droppings. It was splashed everywhere, stairs, railing, platform, and it stank. The boy turned to Cuthbert with startled, terrified eyes, and saw Cuthbert looking back at him with the same expression. "I can't," Cuthbert whispered. "Ro, I can't watch it." Roland shook his head. There was a lesson here, he realized. Not a shining thing, but something that was old and rusty and misshapen. It was why their fathers had let them come, and with his usual stubborn and inarticulate doggedness, Roland laid mental hands over what it was. "You can, Bert." "I won't sleep tonight if I do." "Then you won't," Roland said, not seeing what that had to do with it. Cuthbert suddenly realized Roland's hand and looked at him with such a mute agony that Roland's own doubt came back, and he wished sickly that he had never gone to the West Kitchen that night. His father had been right. Better not to know. Better every man, woman, and child in Taunton dead and stinking than this. But still, whatever the lesson was, rusty, whatever half-buried thing was with sharp edges, he would not let it go or give its grip up on it. "Let's not go up," Cuthbert said. We've seen everything. And Roland nodded reluctantly, feeling his grip on that thing, whatever it was, weaken. Court, he knew, would have knocked them both sprawling and then forced them up to the platform step by cursing step, and sniffing fresh blood back up their noses and down their throats like a salty jam as they went. Court would probably have looped new hemp over the yardroom itself and put the nose around each of their necks in turn, would have made them stand on the trap and feel it, and Court would have been ready to strike them again if either of them wept or lost control of their bladder. And Court, of course, would have been right. For the first time in his life, Roland found himself hating his own childhood. He wished for the long boots of age. He deliberately freed a splinter from the railing and placed it in the breast pocket before turning away. "Why'd you do that?" Cuthbert asked. He wished to answer something swaggering. Oh, the luck of the gallows. But he only looked at Cuthbert and shook his head. "Just so I'll have it," he said. "Always have it." They walked away from the gallows, sat down, and waited. In an hour or so, the first of the townfolk began to gather. Mostly families who had come in broken-down wagons and beat-up buckers, carrying their breakfast with them, hampers of cold pancakes folded over fillings of wild pokeberry jam. Roland felt his stomach growl hungrily, and wondered again with despair where the honor and the nobility was. He had been taught of such things, and was now forced to wonder if they had been lies all along, or only treasures buried deep by the wise. He wanted to believe that, but it seemed to him that hacks in his dirty whites, walking around and around his steaming subterranean kitchen and yelling at potboys, had more honor than this. He fingered the splinter from the gallows tree with sick bewilderment. Cuthbert laid beside him, and his face drawn impassive. 12. In the end it wasn't such of a much, and Roland was glad. Hax was carried in an open cart, but only his huge girth gave him away. He had been blindfolded with a white-black cloth that hung down over his face. A few threw stones, but most nearly continued with their breakfast as they watched. A gunslinger whom the boy did not know well, was glad his father had not drawn the black stone, led the flat cook carefully up the steps. The two guards of the watch had gone ahead and stood on their side of the trap. When Hax and the gunslinger reached the top, the gunslinger threw the noosed rope over the cross tree and then put it over the cook's head, dropping the knot until it lay just below the left ear. The birds had all flown, but Roland knew they were waiting. "Do you wish to make a confession?" the gunslinger asked. "I have nothing to confess," Hax said. His words carried well, and his voice was oddly dignified, in spite of the muffled cloth which hung over his lips. The cloth ruffled slightly in the faint pleasant breeze that had blown up. "I have not forgotten the face of my father. It has been with me through all." Roland glanced sharply at the crowd and was disturbed by what he saw there. A sense of sympathy? Perhaps admiration? He would ask his father. When traitors are called heroes, or heroes traitors, he supposed in his frowning way, dark times must have fallen. Dark times indeed. He wished he understood better. His mind flashed to Court and the bread Court had given them. He felt contempt. The day was coming when Court would serve him. Perhaps not Cuthbert, perhaps Bert would buckle under Court's steady fire and remain a page or a horseboy, or indefinitely worse, a perfumed diplomat, delaying in receiving chambers or looking into bogus crystal balls with doddering kings and princes. But he would not. He knew it. He was for the open lands and long rides. That this seemed a good fate was something he would marvel over later, in his solitude. "Roland! In here!" He took Cuthbert's hands, and their fingers locked together like iron. "Charge the capital murder and sedation," the gunslinger said. "You have crossed the white, and I, Charles, son of Charles, consign you to the ever-black." The crowd murmured, some in protest. "Ah, never! Tell your tale to the underworld, maggot," said Charles of Charles, and he yanked the lever with both yellow-gaunted hands. The trap dropped. Hax plummeted through, still trying to talk. Roland never forgot that. The cook went still trying to talk. And where did he finish the last sentence he would ever begin on earth? His words were ended by the sound an exploding pine knot makes on the hearth in the cold heart of winter's night. But on the whole he thought it not so much. The cook's legs kicked out once in a wide Y. The crowd made a satisfying whistling noise. The guards of the watch dropped their military pose and began to gather things up negligently. Charles, son of Charles, walked back down the steps slowly, mounted his horse, and rode off, cutting roughly through one gaggle of the picnickers, courting a few of the slow coaches, making them scurry. The crowd dispersed rapidly after that, and in the 40 minutes the two boys were left alone in the small hill they had chosen. The birds were returning to examine their new prize. One lit on Hax's shoulder and sat there chummingly, darting its beak at the bright and shiny hoop Hax had always worn at his right ear. "It doesn't look like him at all," Cuthbert said. "Oh, yes it does," Roland said confidently, and then walked towards the gallows, the bread in their hands, but looked abashed. They paused beneath the cross tree, looking up at the dangling, twistingly body. Cuthbert reached up and touched one hairy ankle defiantly. The body started on a new, twisting arc. Then rapidly they broke the bread and spread the rough chunks beneath the dangling feet. Roland looked back just once as they rode away. Now there were thousands of birds. The bread, he grasped in his only dimly, was symbolic then. "It was good," Cuthbert said finally. I liked it. I did." Roland was not shocked by this, although he did not particularly care for the sense. But perhaps he could stand for what Bert was saying. Perhaps he did not finish as a diplomat after all, jokes an easy line of talk or not. "I don't know about that," he said, "but it was something. It truly was." The land did not fall to the good man for another 5 years, and by that time Roland was a gunslinger, his father was dead, he himself had become a matricide, and the world had moved on. The long years and the long rides had begun. 13. "Look!" Jake said, pointing upward. The gunslinger looked up and felt a twingle in his right hip. He winced. He had been in the foothills 2 days now, and although the water skins were almost empty again, it didn't matter now. There would soon be water they could drink. He followed the vector of Jake's finger upward, past the rise of the green plain, to the naked and flashing cliffs and the gorges above it, on up towards the snow cap itself. Faint and far, nothing but a tiny dot. It might have been one of those motes that dance perpetually in front of the eyes, except for its consistency. The gunslinger beheld the man in black, moving up the slopes with deadly progress, a minuscule fly on a huge granite wall. "Is that him?" Jake asked. The gunslinger looked at the depersonalized mote doing its faraway acrobatics, feeling nothing but a premonition of sorrow. "That's him, Jake." "Do you think we'll catch him?" "Not on this side. On the other. And if not, we stand here talking about it." "They're so high," Jake said. "What's on the other side?" "I don't know," the gunslinger said. "I don't think anybody does. Maybe they did once. Come on, boy." They began to move upward again, sending small runnels of pebbles and sand down towards the desert that washed away behind them, in a flat big sheet that seemed to never end. Above them, far above them, the man in black moved up and up and up. It was impossible to see if he looked back. He seemed to leap across impossible gulfs, to scale sheer faces. Once or twice he disappeared, but always they saw him again, until the violet curtain of dusk shut him from their view. When they made their camp, For the evening, the boy spoke little, and the gunslinger wondered if the boy knew what he himself had already intuited. He thought of Cuthbert's face, hot, dismayed, excited. He thought of the bread. He thought of the birds. It ends this way, he thought. Again and again it ends this way. There are quests and roads that lead ever onward, and all of them end at the same place, upon the killing ground. Except perhaps the road to the tower. There, Ka might show its true face. The boy, the sacrifice, his face innocent and very young in the light of their tiny fire, had fallen asleep over his beans. The gunslinger covered him with a horse blanket and then curled up to sleep himself. Thank you everyone for standing with us for a continuation of Majin reading The Dark Tower. Hopefully we'll continue tomorrow. Hopefully, I don't know, I'm not gonna make any promises. Every time I promise, something happens, so yeah. So hopefully we'll see you tomorrow with a new chapter called The Oracle and the Mountains. Long days and pleasant nights.